Last summer, when I did a makeover on my daughter Katie's living room, I pointed out several things that were keeping her room from feeling pulled together. How could she not know these things? I know I taught her. She said, "Mom, you should do a decorating for dummies video." So at long last, here it is. My favorite tried and true guidelines that I had somehow neglected to teach my daughter. I call them guidelines rather than rules because, to quote the famous Billy Baldwin, the first rule of design is that you can break almost all the rules. Once you know the rules, if you have a problem, they might just help you to figure out why a space is not working. My first guideline, the one that Katie actually knew, is to decorate with the colors, patterns, and styles you like. It comes from Billy Baldwin again. Unless you are old, you're probably thinking about one of the Baldwin brothers, the actors. The Billy Baldwin I'm talking about was the first man to become a decorator. And he lived from 1903 to 1983. Probably the most famous person he designed for was Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, decorating her personal homes as well as the Kennedy White House. He was very adamant that he was a decorator, not a designer, although he studied architecture at Princeton and is famous for designing the slipper chair, which is still in production. My favorite quote from him is, "Be faithful to your own taste, because nothing you really like is ever out of style." Along the same lines, he said, "Even when they are far from perfect, loved possessions add personality." This is the one guideline I always follow. My home is full of objects I love, and I have never felt the need to change something because I was out of style. That's not to say that my taste has not changed over the years, but I still love most of the things I have. The next guideline is one I learned from my mother. You need to have multiple sources of lights: chandeliers, table lamps, wall sconces, task lighting, candles, a kerosene lantern, anything. My mother was one of the least judgmental people ever, but I knew she thought it was tacky to light a room with just a ceiling fixture. Even back in the 1960s, my mother insisted on dimmer switches for the chandeliers, and the table lamps had to have three-way bulbs. Now we have electronic devices that dim our switches, and there are designers who specialize just in lighting. Trust me, my mother could have kept up with them. The next guideline is drapes and curtains should be at least 2.5 times the width of the window to create a full, rich feeling. And draperies should be hung so they fully open and do not block the window. All that fabric can get expensive when you're going from floor to ceiling, allowing for headers and hems, matching a pattern, and making it 2.5 times the width of the window. It's very tempting to economize, but trust me, scrimping on the width and length of the drapes is never the right solution. If you want to see how we solved the problem in my daughter Katie's living room, I will put a link in the description to the video of her makeover. If you would like to see even more creative ways to get luxurious, custom-looking drapes on a budget, let me know in the comments, and I can do a whole video devoted just to drapes. If generous drapes are not in your budget, try using a blind or shade and save drapes for later. The next rule of thumb: art should be hung at eye level. What that means is the center of the image should be approximately 57 inches up from the floor, not at the eye level of a professional basketball player. This is one of the most commonly violated rules. It can make a space look really awkward. In the South, someone would say, "Bless their heart, they're trying." But sometimes breaking the rule is called for. A gallery wall or just a pair of stacked pictures can't follow the guideline. But there is some wisdom at the heart of the guideline. For instance, start with the largest, most important item on the gallery wall. Set the center of that image 57 inches from the floor. Then build around it. Or a stacked pair can be hung where the top of one is above 57 inches and the bottom of the other is below 57 inches. I can think of a zillion times to hang art higher or lower. But the thing to remember is, if a picture looks weird, your first thought should be, let's try lowering it. You might be wondering, does she really measure every time? No. My eye is finely trained. And if you walk into people's houses and cringed when the art is hung too high, you might have a finely trained eye too. Now, if you have never once thought that in a house, you probably ought to get out a tape measure and check your art. While we are on the subject of art, gallery walls are not a new thing. We just didn't call them that. I don't think we called them anything. A gallery wall is just a collection of art and objects hung together. There are two guidelines I follow when composing a gallery wall. I start by considering the size of the wall. The tip is, the bigger the wall, the larger the scale of the anchoring objects. Smaller pieces can be used to fill in around the larger anchoring pieces. If you use only small pieces on a large wall, it can feel cluttered. Smaller walls are a wonderful place to group smaller art and objects. The second gallery wall guideline is that individual pieces should have a unifying element like color or style or frames, the subject matter, or some other quality you can identify. I start by collecting more pieces than I expect to use. Sometimes I lay them out on the floor to see how they'll work together. Other times I start by hanging the main object and building around it. That's how I generally start if I have an extremely heavy or valuable item that merits a stud for hanging. Then I space secondary items 3 to 4 inches apart. It's like working a puzzle or playing Tetris. I love adding sconces and other objects to create interest. Some people use painter's tape to plan out their arrangement. They're more organized than I am. I just start hammering in the hooks. Many of my pictures may have extraneous holes behind them where I change the location. My next guideline is very useful for furniture arranging, hanging gallery walls, placing decorative items on a table or a shelf if you're a maximalist like me. Give objects room to breathe. Sometimes that means pulling things away from each other or away from a wall. Sometimes it means removing something. This is one of those times when you need to trust your eye. Try taking a picture or living with your arrangement for a few days. I have found that my favorite groupings evolve over time. My bird wall has had several iterations. I'm beginning to feel like it needs another change. The objects are closer than the 3 to 4 inch guideline, and it feels like it needs some breathing room. What do you think? I often use the objects on a table along with my gallery wall to create a vignette. The guidelines for vignettes, flower arranging, and all other decorating is to use odd numbers of objects. The most common is 3, but 5 and 7 can work too. The eyes like to triangulate. When the objects are of different heights and textures, the eye flows from one to the other and the effect is very satisfying. A pair of figurines, a cluster of candlestick holders, a stack of books, that type of thing, you can count as one for our purposes. Or if you place an object on a stack of books or other riser, combined, they will count as one. The next guideline is balanced. Whether it's a furniture arrangement or a gallery wall, balance is an important element in designing a space. The easiest type of balance to explain is symmetry, where the two sides are mirror reflections of each other. Symmetry is often used in formal spaces, hotels, banks, the White House, a formal living room. Now, think about the teeter-totter you played on in elementary school. 2 kids the same size could balance. That's like formal balance. But if an adult was on one side, it probably took a couple of kids to make it balance. That's less formal. Then you figured out that you could change where you were sitting to change the balance. Some very interesting modern spaces have creative balance. I personally prefer less formal balance without the symmetry, probably because my home's not very formal. I often place things at an angle and move around furniture and other objects looking for a satisfying balance. One guideline that people frequently ask about is rug sizing. The optimal is to have all the furniture on the rug, or in a living room, having at least the 2 front legs of the sofas and chairs on the rug. In a dining room, the rug should be large enough to allow chairs to be pulled away from the table as people are seated and still be on the rug. It's easy to look online, someplace like Wayfair, to find guidelines if you're unsure. Always get the largest rug your budget can accommodate, and your room too. The mistakes that people make are getting inexpensive rugs that are too small and made from fibers that will not wear well. I prefer natural fibers like wool or sisal. Do some research before investing in a rug. If a new rug is very inexpensive, there's always a reason why. The next guideline is for lampshades. Since I use inherited lamps and ones purchased at thrift stores, I often need to find a new shade. Size and shape are the 2 variables. Rounded lamps generally look best with rounded shades. Lamps with straight features are great with boxier shades. This chart shows how to determine the height and width of a shade so the lamp feels proportional. 60% the base, 40% the shade. The width of the shade, twice the width of the base at the largest part. Nothing makes a room feel cheap faster than the wrong lamp with a wrong shade. Now that pattern is making a comeback, people are looking for guidelines on how to combine patterns. If you're like me and love the look, but you're insecure, take heart. It's not that hard. The most basic pairing is a larger flowing pattern used with a compatible geometric. For example, a basic toile de jouy with a ticking fabric. Plaids, ginghams, polka dots, and other repeating geometrics also work well with florals and large patterns. If you're feeling brave, start with a large scale floral or other pattern, the geometric, and then add a third pattern with a small repeating floral or another geometric. You just need to be careful that the colors are harmonious. Another tip, animal prints can be treated like a geometric fabric. Places like Joann's carry decorator fabrics that often have companion patterns, making it easy to find combinations. When it comes to decorating, choose one fabric that will be the major player. That's your hero fabric, while the others are the supporting players. I have put a link in the description for a 4-minute video by Wendy of Chair Whimsy. She is the queen of mixing bold fabrics and colors. The next two guidelines that really changed Katie's living room are to bring in pops of color and then use repetition. We chose an unexpected grassy green that we pulled from her drapery material. Her drapery fabric is her hero fabric, but was only found in the drapes. We carefully poached some drapery material and appliqued it on pillows. That trick allowed us to add pops of color and bring the hero fabric out into the room. We added a fun piece of art that she was supposed to change the matting on to that same green. Think she's done it? Katie also decided to add blue and white porcelain to the room. She has a collection on top of the armoire and repeats it in a lamp. Contrast and repetition. Wonderful guidelines. Are you starting to run out of steam? How about some quick guidelines? Books on a shelf should be pulled forward an equidistance from the front of the shelf. They will always look tidier when you do that. Collections should be displayed together for maximum impact. Scattered around, they just look like clutter. Small items can be corralled on a tray to maximize the effect. And lastly, don't block windows with furniture. Obviously, armoires, tall dressers, tall headboards, a dressing table with a mirror, anything that obscures the view might not be a good idea. Where possible, pull sofas away from a window. But again, there are some fabulous exceptions. Notice how these are not solid pieces of furniture. This demi-lune belonged to my great aunt. She used it with this exact lamp in front of a floor-to-ceiling window in her living room. It was beautiful. I think I'm going to go back and watch Katie's living room video, Budget Living Room Makeover Using Thrifted Finds, linked below. Because she had been faithful in choosing a wall color and drapery fabric she loves, we could easily apply all of these guidelines in her quick makeover. Should we end with one more Billy Baldwin quote? If you have marvelous taste and know exactly what you want, you don't need a decorator. So have fun, because the most creative solutions and the best stories begin with the biggest challenges. See you next time.